The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat outside the dusty roadside diner, casting erratic shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 66's forgotten stretch. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour when the desert wind whispered secrets to the sagebrush, and the only light for miles came from the glow of a single bulb swinging above the door. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of stale coffee and sizzling grease, the jukebox humming a low, mournful country tune about lost highways and broken dreams. At the counter, a lone figure hunched over a cup of black coffee. Ethan Harlan, a man whose leather jacket bore the faded insignia of the Iron Vow MC, a patch worn thin by years of wind and regret. Behind the counter, Olivia Reyes wiped down the formica surface with a rag that had seen better days, her eyes darting nervously toward the three men at the far booth. They were out of place here, suits too crisp for this godforsaken pit stop, their whispers sharp and urgent like shards of glass. Olivia had served her share of travelers, truckers with calloused hands, families chasing sunsets, but these men carried the weight of something darker, their gazes lingering too long on the door, as if expecting trouble to walk in. She poured Ethan's coffee with a steady hand, but as she turned to set it down, her eyes caught the glint of a small vial slipping from one man's pocket. It vanished into the waiter's hand, who nodded subtly before heading her way. Olivia's heart stuttered. She was no stranger to the underbelly of these lonely diners, stories of drifters poisoned for a grudge, debts settled in the dead of night. But this felt different, premeditated, the air thickening with unspoken threat. The waiter approached Ethan from behind, his smile forced, the vial's contents already dissolving into what should have been a harmless refill. Ethan's back was to it all, his broad shoulders slumped, fingers tracing the rim of his empty cup as if lost in the ghosts of old roads. He was a biker through and through, tattoos snaking up his arms like vines over forgotten ruins, each one a marker of battles won and promises broken. 20 years ago, in the smoke of a desert skirmish halfway around the world, Ethan had sworn an oath to a brother in arms: protect the innocent, stand for the forgotten, no matter the cost. That vow had pulled him through wars and wrecks, but lately it felt like a chain dragging him into the dust. She couldn't let it happen. Not here, not to this stranger who looked like he'd already carried too much. As the waiter neared, Olivia leaned across the counter, her voice a hushed thread in the diner's quiet hum. "Don't drink that," she whispered, her breath warm against Ethan's ear, eyes flicking to the approaching shadow. "It's not right. Trust me. I've seen enough to know." Ethan's head snapped up, his steel-grey eyes meeting hers for a split second, a flicker of surprise cutting through the weariness. He didn't question it. Something in her tone, raw and urgent, echoed the instincts that had kept him alive through firefights and midnight chases. The waiter paused, vial hand frozen mid-motion, but Ethan was already moving. With a fluid grace born of muscle memory, he shoved back from the stool, his boot catching the waiter's ankle in a tangle that sent the man sprawling. The cup shattered on the tile floor, a dark, unnatural foam bubbling from its shards, poison, clear as the desert sky at dawn. The three suits bolted from the booth, chairs scraping like thunder, but Ethan was faster. He grabbed a nearby chair, swinging it low to trip the nearest one, the wood cracking against knees with a sound like splintering bone. Olivia ducked behind the counter, her pulse racing. As the diner erupted into chaos, the jukebox skipping, plates rattling, the scent of spilled coffee mingling with the metallic tang of fear. Outside, engines roared to life in the distance, but Ethan didn't run. He pinned the waiter against the wall, his forearm like iron across the man's throat. "Who sent you?" Ethan's voice was gravel, low and unyielding, the kind that had commanded squads in the heat of sandstorms. The man sputtered, eyes wide with panic, but before words could form, the suits scrambled out the door, tires screeching into the night. Olivia emerged, trembling but resolute, grabbing the shattered cup's remnants with a napkin. "Call the sheriff," she urged, but Ethan shook his head, releasing the waiter with a shove that left the man gasping on the floor. "I can't," Ethan said, his gaze distant, as if the attempt on his life had unlocked a door long bolted shut. He pulled a worn photo from his wallet, a faded snapshot of a young woman and a child, edges curled from years of hiding. "This isn't random. It's tied to something I left behind." Olivia studied him, the diner's fluorescent light carving shadows across his scarred jawline. She'd whispered a warning on instinct, driven by the moral compass her own losses had forged. A husband gone too soon, a daughter she protected with every shift. But now, as sirens wailed faintly in the approaching distance, she realized her action had rippled further than she knew. Ethan holstered the photo, his resolve hardening like steel in a forge. "You just pulled me back from the edge. Now I owe you, and that means facing what I've been running from." The desert night pressed in, stars wheeling overhead like silent witnesses. Ethan stepped outside, the cool air biting at his skin, the faint smell of gasoline from his Harley mingling with the earth's dry breath. He revved the engine, the throaty rumble echoing his awakening, a forgotten promise stirring to life. The Iron Vow wasn't just a club, it was a brotherhood, bound by blood and oath, scattered now, but ready to ride if called. As he glanced back at the diner, Olivia silhouetted in the doorway, he knew this whisper had saved more than his life. It had reignited a fire, one that would draw the shadows of his past into the light, forcing him to honor the vow that defined him. The road ahead stretched infinite, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt its pull not as escape, but as purpose. What if you subscribed right now, so you don't miss how this ride unfolds? Hit that button. Let's keep the story rolling together. The sheriff arrived minutes later, lights flashing like erratic lightning across the diner's windows. Ethan gave a sparse account, omitting the deeper currents that tugged at him, while Olivia backed him up with quiet conviction. The waiter, pale and muttering excuses, was cuffed and led away, the vial's remnants bagged as evidence. But as the cruiser pulled out, dust swirling in its wake, Ethan lingered by his bike, the photo burning a hole in his pocket. The woman in the image was Lena, his late commander's sister, the child her son, now a young man, if fate had been kind. A decade ago, Ethan had promised to watch over them after the war claimed his friend, but grief and the open road had eroded that oath into silence. Whispers from old contacts had hinted at trouble. Lena entangled in a web of local corruption, her diner a front for something uglier, debts to men who played with poison as casually as cards. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Mounting his Harley, the leather seat creaking under him, Ethan felt the engine's vibrations sync with his pulse. The desert highway unfurled before him, a ribbon of black under the moon's pale gaze, carrying scents of creosote and distant rain. Olivia watched from the doorway, arms crossed, her whisper echoing in his mind like a lifeline. She'd seen the strange glint in the drink, the subtle handoff, and acted without hesitation. A stranger's mercy in a world quick to turn blind. Now, as taillights faded into the night, she wondered if her intervention had invited danger to her own door. But deep down, a spark of something unfamiliar stirred. Hope, perhaps, that not all roads led to isolation. Ethan rode hard, the wind whipping his face, stripping away layers of dust and doubt. By dawn, the first rays painted the horizon in gold, glinting off his handlebars like a benediction. He needed his crew, the Iron Vow brothers, scattered from Reno to Tucson, men who'd shared foxholes and full-throttle escapes. A single call, and they'd converge, loyal as the tide. But this wasn't just about vengeance. It was redemption, a chance to fulfill the promise that had haunted his dreams. The suits' faces lingered in his memory, their desperation a clue to the rot festering in the town's underbelly, corrupt officials, shadow dealings that preyed on the vulnerable. Lena's boy, now 18, had reached out months ago, a cryptic message about protecting Mom, but Ethan had let fear silence it. No more. As the sun crested, Ethan pulled into a roadside motel, the sign buzzing faintly. He dialed the number etched in his soul, the line crackling before a gravelly voice answered, "Hawk, that you?" It was Marcus, his second in command, voice thick with sleep but sharpening instantly. "Trouble found me," Ethan said, the words heavy, "and it's pulling me back to the promise." A pause, then the reply. "We're riding. Where?" The bond clicked into place, unbreakable as forged iron. By noon, engines would thunder, a convoy forming like storm clouds, ready to chase justice through the canyons of morality and memory. Olivia's whisper had been the spark. Now the fire spread, illuminating paths long darkened by loss. The motel room smelled of faded cigarette smoke and cheap pine cleaner, the kind that clung to the thin curtains like a bad memory. Ethan Harlan paced the worn carpet, phone pressed to his ear. The voice on the other end, a lifeline cutting through the static. Marcus's words hung in the air, steady as the rumble of a well-tuned engine. "Give me the coordinates, brother. We'll be there by dusk." Ethan rattled off the motel's faded sign. Desert Rose, mile marker 247, and hung up, the click echoing in the empty space. He sank onto the sagging bed, the springs groaning under his weight, and pulled out the photo again. Lena's smile in the snapshot was soft, unscarred by the years that had followed, her son's eyes wide with that innocent trust Ethan had sworn to guard. The promise, made in the dim light of a field hospital overseas, replayed like a scratched reel. "If I don't make it, Hawk, look after them. They're all I've got left." His friend had slipped away that night, blood staining the sand, but the oath had etched itself into Ethan's bones, a weight he'd carried across continents and counties until it became just another shadow on the road. Outside, the sun climbed higher, baking the asphalt until it shimmered like molten glass. Ethan stepped into the heat, his boots crunching gravel as he checked his Harley, running a hand over the chrome that gleamed despite the dust. The bike was more than machine. It was extension, a steel-hearted companion that had outrun storms and regrets alike. He thought of Olivia back at the diner, her whisper a catalyst he couldn't shake. She'd seen the poison before it struck, her intuition sharper than any blade, born from nights serving the lost and the desperate. What had driven her to risk it? A flicker of shared pain, perhaps, eyes that recognized the hollow look of someone who'd lost too much. Ethan mounted up, the engine coughing to life with a throaty growl that vibrated through his chest, scattering the motel's stray cats into the scrub. The highway called, pulling him eastward toward the town Lena had called home, a place called Shadow Ridge, nestled in canyons where secrets pooled like rainwater, miles blurred under his tires, the desert unfolding in waves of ochre and sage, the wind carrying the faint earthy tang of creosote blooming under the relentless sun. Ethan's mind wandered to the suits from the diner, their polished shoes scuffing the floor in panic. Faces etched with the cold calculation of men who bought loyalty with threats. They weren't random thugs, their precision screamed organization, a network woven into the town's fabric, preying on folks like Lena who dared to stand against it. Whispers from old roots had reached him before. Shadow Ridge's sheriff's office turned a blind eye to backroom deals, land grabs disguised as progress, families squeezed until they broke. Lena's diner, once a haven for travelers, had become a pawn in that game, her refusal to sell out marking her for pressure. The boy's message, scrawled in hasty text months back, "Mom's in trouble, Uncle Hawk. They won't stop," had been the first crack, but Ethan had ridden on, convincing himself the road would bury it. No longer. By mid-afternoon, the first bikes appeared on the horizon, silhouettes against the haze, like avengers from a forgotten myth. Marcus led the pack, his massive frame hunched over a custom chopper, beard whipping in the wind, followed by a dozen Iron Vow brothers, veterans all, their jackets patched with the Vow's emblem, a clenched fist around a chain link, unbreakable. They pulled into the motel's lot in a thunderous wave, engines cutting off one by one until silence settled, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk wheeling overhead. Marcus dismounted, clapping Ethan on the shoulder with a grip like weathered oak. "You look like hell, Hawk. What's the play?" The others gathered, faces sun-leathered and eyes sharp. Javier, the quiet medic who'd patched wounds in jungles, Tyler, the wiry scout with a knack for shadows, and the rest, a mosaic of scars and stories bound by the code they'd forged in fire. Ethan laid it out under the motel's awning, the group forming a loose circle, the air thick with the scent of hot metal and sweat-soaked leather. He spoke of the diner, the poison, Olivia's warning, her name lingering like a talisman. Then the deeper cut, Lena, the promise, the boy now facing the same darkness that had claimed his father. Murmurs rippled through the crew, nods of recognition. Marcus crossed his arms, his voice a low rumble. "We rode for less back in the day. But this is blood oath. Who's pulling the strings?" Ethan described the suits, their urgency, the vial's bitter foam. Speculation flew, local developers with ties to crooked badges, a syndicate muscling in on the ridge's water rights, using fear to carve out empires. Javier leaned in, his medics calm, masking the fire beneath. "Sounds like they've been testing waters, poisons personal, meant to send a message. We ride in quiet, scout first. No guns blazing, that's their game." As the sun dipped toward the canyons, casting long shadows that clawed at the ground, the convoy reformed. Ethan took point, the Brotherhood fanning out behind like a steel river, their presence a silent vow renewed. The road to Shadow Ridge wound through red rock spires, the air cooling to carry hints of pine from higher ground. Ethan felt the shift in his chest. The old inertia giving way to purpose, the promise no longer a ghost, but a beacon. Olivia's face flashed in his mind, her resolute stance in the diner's light, a stranger who'd chosen to act. Had she known the ripple? Back at the diner, she'd lock up soon, the neon sign her only sentinel, wondering if the biker she'd saved would circle back. But Ethan rode on, the engine's harmony drowning doubt, toward a town where corruption festered like an open wound. Dusk painted the sky in bruised purples as they crested the ridge, Shadow Ridge sprawling below. A cluster of low buildings hugging the dry riverbed, lights winking like wary eyes. Ethan's gaze fixed on the diner's twin, Lena's place, Hope's End Cafe, its sign crooked from neglect. Smoke curled from a back alley, and shadows moved. Watchers, perhaps, or worse. He signaled a pull-off, the bikes idling low as the crew dismounted into the gathering twilight. Tyler slipped ahead, vanishing into the scrub like smoke, while Marcus scanned the horizon. "We find the boy first," Ethan said, voice steady. "Then we unravel this, for the vow." The men nodded, a pact sealed in the cooling air. Loyalty thicker than blood. But as night deepened, a lone figure emerged from the cafe's door, a young man, tall and wary, clutching a jacket too big for his frame. His eyes met Ethan's across the distance, recognition sparking like flint on steel. The promise stirred, alive and demanding, pulling them all into its inexorable current. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments they reach you. The young man's silhouette sharpened against the cafe's backlit door, his posture rigid like a wire pulled taut, the oversized jacket hanging off shoulders that carried the weight of unspoken fears. Ethan Harlan's breath caught in the cooling dusk, the air now laced with the sharp bite of juniper from the canyon walls, mingling with the faint, acrid whiff of alley smoke that twisted upward like a warning. Shadow Ridge lay hushed below, its streets a labyrinth of faded storefronts and boarded windows. The kind of town where secrets fermented in the shadows of progress long stalled. The Iron Vow crew held their positions in the scrub, engines silenced to a whisper, the only sound the distant hum of a generator and the soft scrape of boots on parched earth. Tyler crouched low beside Ethan, his scout's eyes narrowing through binoculars, murmuring, "That's him. Matches the description from your text, but he's not alone, two shadows peeling off from the side lot." Ethan nodded, his pulse sinking with the steady thrum of anticipation that had built since the diner's chaos. The boy, Noah, Lena's son, now on the cusp of manhood, stepped fully into the open, scanning the ridge with a wariness that mirrored Ethan's own from years past. Those eyes, so like his father's, held a flicker of desperation, the same quiet plea that had echoed in the cryptic message months ago. Ethan had failed once, letting the road swallow his duty, but Olivia's whisper had shattered that numbness, pulling him here to redeem what time had nearly erased. He signaled Marcus with a subtle hand gesture, the big man's nod a silent affirmation of the bond that no distance could break. The crew moved like ghosts, fanning out along the ridge's edge, their leather creaking softly, the metallic tang of gun oil, faint but present. No one drew, not yet. This was about honor, not havoc. Descending the slope, Ethan kept low, the gravel crunching under his boots like brittle bones, the canyon's breath cool against his sweat-dampened skin. Noah froze as the first silhouette emerged from the twilight. Ethan's, broad and unyielding, hands raised palms out to signal peace. The young man's hand twitched toward his pocket, but recognition dawned slowly, etching lines of relief and doubt across his face. "Uncle Hawk?" Noah's voice cracked, barely above the wind's murmur, laced with the raw edge of someone who'd guarded secrets too long. Ethan closed the gap, stopping a respectful arm's length away, the cafe's neon sign buzzing faintly behind them, casting erratic blue glows on Noah's pale features. "It's me, kid. Your message. I should have come sooner. Where's your mom?" Noah's gaze darted to the alley, where the shadows Ethan had spotted lingered, their forms bulky under street lamps that flickered like hesitant confessions. Inside, but they're watching. The suits from the diner, they're part of it. Mom wouldn't sell the cafe, said it was Dad's legacy, the only thing clean left in this town. They started with threats, then worse. His words trailed off, eyes dropping to the ground, the implication hanging heavy, vestiges of pressure that no child should witness. Ethan felt the vow tighten in his chest, a coil of iron forged in loss, the promise to protect this family now a living flame. He placed a steady hand on Noah's shoulder, the leather of his glove rough against the boy's thin jacket, conveying the solidarity of men who'd stared down worse than corrupt whispers. From the ridge, Marcus and Javier approached silently, their presence a wall of quiet strength, while Tyler melted into the periphery to keep eyes on the watchers. The alley figures shifted, one pulling a phone to his ear, the low murmur of a voice carrying on the breeze like a serpent's hiss. Ethan leaned in, his voice gravel-soft. "We're here now. The Iron Vow, your dad's brothers in all but blood. Tell me everything, and we'll stand between you and this rot." Noah hesitated, the canyon's deepening shadows playing across his face, then nodded, the dam breaking in a rush of words. The syndicate, he explained, was led by a silver-tongued developer named Victor Kane, a man whose empire of dusty lots and rigged bids had choked Shadow Ridge's soul. The sheriff's office turned blind eyes for envelopes of cash, and Lena's cafe sat on prime land, water rights hidden beneath, a vein of gold in the arid heart. poison at the diner had been a message for Ethan, rumors of his return stirring Kane's paranoia. But the real target was breaking Lena's spirit, forcing her hand through Noah's fear. As Noah spoke, the air thickened with the scent of impending rain, distant thunder rumbling like an engine revving in the clouds. Ethan's mind raced, piecing the fragments, the suit's desperation, the waiter's compliance, Olivia's unerring instinct back at the roadside stop. She'd seen the darkness closing in and chosen light, a stranger's act that now anchored this convergence. But dilemmas gnawed, ride-in guns drawn, and risk escalating to the violence Kane thrived on, or play the long game, exposing the corruption through truth and testimony. Javier, ever the voice of measured calm, murmured from the side, "We document it all. Faces, plates, whispers. Let the light of day burn them out." Marcus grunted agreement, his massive frame a sentinel, the crew's loyalty a shield forged in shared scars. Suddenly, the alley shadows stirred to life, footsteps echoing sharp against the cafe's rear wall. One man, burly with a glint of metal at his belt, barked into his phone before stepping forward, eyes locking on the group. "You lost, biker? This ain't tourist hour." Ethan's hand hovered near his side, not drawing but ready, the tension coiling like a spring in the gloaming. Noah tensed beside him, but Ethan met the man's gaze steadily, his voice cutting through the hush like a blade. "Just family business, but if you're Kane's dog, tell him the vow's here to collect on old debts." The man sneered, but uncertainty flickered. Numbers favored the bikers, their presence a thunderhead on the horizon. He backed off slowly, radio crackling with urgent code, vanishing into the night as tires squealed from a side street. The standoff broken, Ethan turned to Noah, urgency etching his features. "Get your mom. We're moving her out tonight, safe house up the ridge." As they slipped toward the cafe's side door, the first fat drops of rain pattered on the tin roof, slicking the ground to a sheen that reflected the stars emerging overhead. Inside, Lena waited, her face a map of weary resolve, the air heavy with the aroma of cooling pie and fresh brewed tea, a fragile haven amid the storm. She embraced Noah fiercely, then met Ethan's eyes, the weight of the unspoken promise passing between them like a torch relit. "You came," she whispered, voice thick with unshed tears. Ethan nodded, the crew forming a perimeter outside, rain now drumming steadily, washing the dust from their jackets. But as lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the town's underbelly, Ethan knew this was only the gathering. Kane's web would tighten, testing the vow's mettle, forcing choices between swift justice and the patient grind of moral reckoning. The road to redemption twisted ahead, slick and unforgiving, but with brothers at his back and a family's trust reclaimed, Ethan rode its curve without flinching. Rain lashed the windows of Hope's End Cafe like fingers clawing for entry, the tin roof amplifying each drop into a relentless drumbeat that drowned the distant thunder. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting haze of steam from a kettle on the stove, mingling with the earthy scent of damp soil seeping through the cracks. Lena Reyes now, after years of forging her own path, stood behind the counter, her hands steady as she poured tea into mismatched mugs. But her eyes betrayed the storm within, dark circles etched from sleepless nights, a jaw set against the fear that had shadowed her since Ethan's friend, her husband, had faded into memory. Noah hovered close, his youthful frame a barrier between her and the door, while Ethan leaned against the wall. The crew's low voices murmuring outside like a protective hum. Ethan's gaze swept the room, taking in the faded photos on the walls, snapshots of better days, families laughing under sunnier skies, the cafe bustling before the syndicate's grip tightened. The promise he'd made in that far-off field hospital felt tangible now, a weight pressing on his chest heavier than the rain-soaked leather clinging to his skin. "We can't stay here long," he said, voice low and measured, cutting through the patter like a knife through fog. "Kane's men will circle back. The safe house Marcus scouted, it's a cabin up in the pines, off the grid. We'll hole up there, plan our next move." Lena met his eyes, the flicker of old trust warring with fresh doubt, her fingers tightening around the mug. "And what then, Hawk? Expose them? That man's got the sheriff in his pocket, judges who look the other way. We've lost enough already." The words hung, laced with the bitterness of truths Ethan had evaded for too long. He stepped forward, the floorboards creaking under his boots, and placed the photo on the counter, the one that had survived pockets and perils. "This is why I came back. Your brother, my brother, trusted me to keep you safe. I let the road take me away, but no more. We're not storming in blind. Javier's got contacts, ways to gather proof without spilling blood." Outside, lightning forked the sky, illuminating the crew's silhouettes. Marcus wiping rain from his beard, Tyler scanning the alley with night vision borrowed from old military stashes, Javier checking a small recorder tucked in his jacket. They were the chosen family, bound not by birth, but by vows etched in foxholes and midnight rides, their loyalty a bulwark against the corruption that festered in places like Shadow Ridge. Noah shifted, his voice breaking the tension like a pebble in still water. "They hurt people, Uncle Hawk, not just threats, signs of aggression on folks who spoke up. Mom's been holding the line, but last week..." He trailed off, glancing at Lena, who nodded faintly, her resolve cracking just enough to reveal the scars beneath. Ethan felt the ethical coil tighten. Justice demanded action, but rushing in could mirror the syndicate's brutality, tainting the very honor they rode for. "We play it smart," he replied, pulling a chair out with a scrape that echoed his determination. "Record everything, conversations, faces, the envelopes they pass, turn their shadows into daylight. Kane thrives on fear, we starve it with truth." Lena's eyes softened, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "The first real warmth in the dim light, like old times, when you boys would talk strategy over coffee after a long haul." The rain eased to a drizzle as they gathered supplies. Canned goods from the pantry, a flashlight that flickered like hesitant hope, blankets smelling of lavender from Lena's careful washing. Ethan helped Noah load a duffel, their movements synchronized in the quiet intimacy of shared purpose, the boys' tentative trust rebuilding like a bridge over chasms of absence. But as they stepped toward the back door, a low rumble cut the night. Not thunder, but engines, distant yet closing, headlights piercing the gloom like predatory eyes. Tyler burst in, rain streaming from his jacket, breath quick. 3 vehicles, black SUVs coming from the East Ridge. Kane's calling in reinforcements must have gotten word from the alley watcher. Marcus followed, his massive form filling the doorway, water pooling at his feet. "We ride now? Split the convoy. Lena and Noah with me and Javier. Hawk, you and Tyler flank from the North Trail." Adrenaline surged through Ethan, sharp as the ozone-scented air. His hand instinctively checking the bike keys in his pocket. The dilemma sharpened. Evade and regroup, preserving their moral high ground, or confront here, risking escalation that could paint them as the villains in Kane's twisted narrative. Loyalty to the vow demanded protection, but redemption whispered patience, the long ride to expose the rot without becoming it. "Evade," Ethan decided, voice steady as canyon stone. "We don't give them the fight they want, not yet." Lena clutched Noah's hand, her whisper fierce. "Be careful, all of you. This town's poisoned enough without more blood." The crew moved like a well-oiled machine, bikes kicking to life in the alley, the throaty roars muffled by the persisting drizzle, exhaust mingling with the petrichor rising from the earth. They burst onto the back road, a serpent of steel weaving through slick switchbacks, the canyon walls looming like silent guardians. Ethan took rear guard, his Harley hugging the curves, the vibration thrumming through him like a second heartbeat. Headlights danced in his mirrors, the SUVs gaining, their forms hulking shadows in the downpour. Tyler veered ahead, scouting a detour through a dry wash, mud splashing up in gritty arcs that stung Ethan's face. The chase stretched, tension coiling with each mile, the air alive with the whine of tires on wet gravel and the faint metallic tang of fierce sweat under leather. Marcus's voice crackled over a borrowed radio. "Safe house in sight. Hold 'em off." Ethan nodded to himself, gunning the engine, the bike leaping forward in a spray of water, buying time for the family ahead. As the cabin emerged, a squat timber structure nestled in pine thickets, its windows dark and welcoming, the SUVs faltered, perhaps wary of the narrowing trail or the Brotherhood's unyielding front. They peeled off into the night, taillights fading like retreating specters, but Ethan knew it was temporary. Inside the cabin, lamps flickered to life, casting warm glows on rough-hewn walls that smelled of resin and old wood smoke. Lena settled Noah by the fire, the crackle of flames a counterpoint to the storm's fade, while the crew gathered around a scarred table, maps unfurled like battle plans. Javier played back snippets from his recorder, garbled voices from the alley, hints of Kane's name dropped like careless crumbs. "This ties them," he said, eyes gleaming. "But we need more. Witnesses, ledgers. Shadow Ridge has good folks who've stayed silent too long." Ethan stood by the window, rain tracing rivulets down the glass, his reflection scarred and resolute. Olivia's whisper echoed from miles back, a thread connecting diner to canyon, stranger to kin. Her act had ignited this, saving not just him, but pulling the promise into motion. Dilemmas lingered, how far to push without crossing into vengeance. But with brothers' voices rising in strategy, Lena's quiet thanks warming the room, and Noah's gaze holding newfound steel, Ethan felt the vow's strength. The road to justice wound through moral thickets, but they rode it together. Engines of honor against the tide of corruption. Dawn would break soon, painting the pines in gold, revealing paths forward. For now, in the cabin's shelter, the family chosen breathed as one, ready for the revelations to come. If this chapter stirred something in you, hit that like button. It helps spread these stories of grit and grace to more riders on the road. The cabin's fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the knotty pine walls, where the resinous scent of burning logs mingled with the damp earthiness of rain-soaked clothes hung to dry. Dawn's first light filtered through the grimy windows, painting the room in muted golds that softened the edges of exhaustion etched on every face. Ethan Harlan sat at the scarred oak table, his calloused fingers tracing the creases of an old map of Shadow Ridge, the paper worn thin like the veil between past promises and present peril. Lena stirred a pot of oatmeal on the wood stove, the steam rising in lazy curls that carried hints of cinnamon, a small act of normalcy in the storm's aftermath. Noah perched nearby, his eyes brighter now, the night's evasion having forged a tentative shield around his fear. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, his broad frame blocking the chill draft from the porch, arms crossed over a chest that bore the faint outline of old shrapnel scars beneath his shirt. "Kane's not done," he rumbled, voice like gravel under tires. "Those SUVs were just scouts. He'll push harder now. Squeeze the town until someone cracks." Javier nodded from his spot by the window, fiddling with the recorder, its tiny screen glowing with fragments of audio, muffled exchanges from the alley, names dropped like pebbles into a dark well. Tyler paced the creaky floorboards, his wiry energy coiled tight, scouting reports from the ridge still fresh in his mind. Kane's men patrolling the main drag, whispers of a town meeting rigged to rubber-stamp land grabs. Ethan looked up, the map's lines blurring slightly in his vision, the weight of the vow pressing like an unseen hand on his shoulder. The promise to Lena's late husband replayed in fragments. Whispers in a sand-swept tent, the metallic tang of blood in the air, a brother's final trust handed over like a baton in a relay he couldn't drop. Olivia's warning at the diner had been the jolt, pulling him from numb wandering into this fray. But here in the cabin's quiet, doubts surfaced, expose the corruption cleanly, or risk the Brotherhood in a direct stand that could mirror the syndicate's ruthlessness. "We start with the folks who've seen too much," Ethan said, folding the map with a decisive snap. "Noah, you know the names, the shop owners, the ranchers Kane's pressured. We talk to them one by one, get their stories on record. No confrontation, just truth." Lena set mugs of steaming oatmeal on the table, her movements precise despite the tremor in her hands, the aroma grounding the room like an anchor in choppy waters. "It's not that simple, Hawk. Folks here are scared, vestiges of pressure on their doors, livelihoods hanging by threads. My cafe's just the start. Kane wants the whole ridge for his water scheme, turning scrub into subdivisions while the river runs dry for everyone else." Her voice held the quiet steel of survival, eyes meeting Ethan's with a depth that stirred echoes of the photo in his wallet. Noah spooned his breakfast absently, adding, "Old man Hargrove at the feed store. He's got ledgers, proof of the payoffs, but he'll clam up unless he sees we're solid." The boy glanced at the crew, the Iron Vow's presence a tangible force, Marcus's unyielding bulk, Javier's thoughtful gaze, Tyler's restless vigilance. They were the family Ethan had chosen in foxholes and full-throttle nights, their loyalty a counterweight to the isolation that had nearly claimed him. As the sun climbed, burning off the morning mist that clung to the pines like reluctant ghosts, the group split tasks. Ethan and Tyler headed down the trail on foot, boots sinking into mud softened by the night's rain, the air crisp with the sharp tang of wet needles and distant sage. The path wound through thickets where birdsong pierced the hush, a deceptive peace masking the town's undercurrents. Shadow Ridge unfolded below, its rooftops glinting under the strengthening light, the dry riverbed a scar across the landscape. They approached Hargrove's feed store from the back alley, the building's weathered siding creaking in the breeze, stacks of hay bales exuding a sweet, fermented scent that clashed with the faint oiliness of idling trucks nearby. Hargrove was a wiry elder, his face a roadmap of sun and sorrow, sweeping the porch when they arrived. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Ethan's leather jacket, the Vow patch a symbol that could mean trouble or salvation. "Bikers poking around. Kane's got enough of his own hounds." Tyler hung back, scanning for watchers, while Ethan stepped forward, hands open, voice steady as canyon wind. "Not his kind, sir. We're here for Lena and the boy. Heard you've got stories that need telling." The sheriff looks away, but truth doesn't. Hargrove paused, broom stilling, the ethical tug-of-war playing across his features, silence for safety or voice for justice. After a long beat, he jerked his head toward the storeroom, the door's hinges whining like a confession. Inside, amid sacks of grain that rustled softly, Hargrove pulled a ledger from a hidden shelf, its pages yellowed and crammed with notations, dates, amounts, initials that pointed to Kane's web. "Started small," he muttered, the air thick with dust motes dancing in the light slanting through a high window. Envelopes to keep quiet about the water diversions, then signs of aggression, barns vandalized, livestock gone missing. Lena's cafe sits on the key aquifer. They want it buried under concrete. Ethan recorded it all, Javier's device capturing the gravelly timbre, each word a brick in the wall of evidence. But as Hargrove spoke, a shadow passed the window, Kane's man, circling like a vulture. Radio crackling faintly. Tyler signaled from outside, tension spiking the air like static before a storm. They slipped out the back, ledger photocopies tucked away, hearts pounding with the thrill of progress, laced with peril. Rendezvousing at a neutral spot, a forgotten overlook where the canyon dropped away in vertiginous reds and browns. Ethan shared the findings with the crew via radio. the static underscoring the fragility of their gains. Marcus's voice cut through. "Good haul, but Kane'll sniff it. We need one more." The nurse at the clinic, she patched up a few after accidents. Lena, back at the cabin with Noah and Javier, added her quiet insight over the line. "She's Emily, works nights, careful, she's got a kid to protect." The dilemma deepened. Push for more voices, risking exposure, or consolidate and strike with what they had, honoring the vow's call for measured justice over reckless charge. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, baking the earth until it shimmered, the crew converging at the overlook. Faces sun-burnished and resolute, they pored over the ledger under a lone juniper's shade, its needles whispering in the hot gusts. Ethan felt the promise pulse stronger, Olivia's distant whisper a foundational echo, her act of mercy rippling into this mosaic of testimony. But as they planned the next approach, a dust plume rose on the horizon. Vehicles closing in. Tyler's binoculars confirmed it. Kane's enforcers, drawn by Hargrove's slip or blind luck. "Time to ride," Ethan said, mounting up. The engines roar, a defiant symphony against the encroaching threat. The convoy peeled out, weaving through back trails slick with residual mud. The chase a test of wits over weapons. They lost the tails in a maze of arroyos, emerging breathless at a higher vantage, the ridge sprawling like a challenge below. In the cooling afternoon, with evidence mounting like storm clouds, Ethan turned to his brothers, the chosen family's bond unyielding. This isn't about breaking them, it's about lifting the town from the dark, one truth at a time. Nods rippled through the group, loyalty forged anew in the fire of purpose. Lena's voice crackled over the radio from the cabin. "We're safe, keep going, for all of us." The road to redemption curved onward, ethical shadows lengthening. But with the vow at his side, Ethan pressed on, the horizon promising not just confrontation, but the quiet victory of honor reclaimed. The overlook's juniper provided scant shade as the afternoon sun scorched the canyon rims, turning the air into a shimmering haze that carried the dry, resinous bite of overheated earth. Ethan Harlan wiped sweat from his brow, the salt stinging the faint scar along his temple, a memento from a long-ago ambush that felt tame compared to the web tightening around Shadow Ridge. The crew huddled around the ledger's photocopies, spread on a flat rock, the paper edges curling in the heat, ink blurring slightly like secrets half revealed. Marcus traced a finger over the notations, his thick brow furrowed, the faint scent of his pipe tobacco lingering from a quick smoke break. "Hargrove's got the money trail, but it's circumstantial. We need that nurse. Emily's seen the fallout up close, broken bones from falls, bruises hidden under sleeves. If she talks, it paints Kane as the monster he is." Tyler nodded, his lean frame coiled like a spring, binoculars dangling from his neck as he scanned the horizon where dust trails from their evasion still settled. "Clinic's on the edge of town, low profile. I can get in quiet, scout the back entrance." Javier, ever the anchor, adjusted the recorder in his vest, its weight a reminder of the truths they'd captured so far. Voices trembling with admissions, the ethical weight of coaxing silence into testimony. Noah's words from the radio earlier echoed in Ethan's mind. The nurse had a daughter, young and vulnerable, much like the boy himself. Pressing her meant risking her world, a dilemma that gnawed at the vow's core. Protect the innocent without becoming the threat they fled. Ethan folded the papers, tucking them into his jacket's inner pocket, the leather warm against his skin. "We go together but soft. No demands, just offer the shield. Lena and Noah stay put. This town's eyes are everywhere." The crew mounted up, engines coughing to life in a low growl that vibrated through the ground, scattering pebbles like startled thoughts. The descent into Shadow Ridge wound through scrub-choked trails, the bikes hugging the curves with a precision born of countless rides, the air whipping past, laden with the sharp tang of creosote blooming under the relentless light. Shadow Ridge emerged from the heat mirage, its buildings squat and sun-bleached, the clinic a modest brick structure on the outskirts, its sign faded to a whisper, Ridge Health Center. They pulled into a side lot overgrown with weeds that rasped against the Harley's sides, dismounting with the quiet efficiency of men who'd learned stealth in shadowed wars. Tyler led, slipping ahead to the alley where dumpsters exhaled the faint medicinal reek of discarded bandages and antiseptic. Ethan followed with Marcus, their boots silent on the cracked pavement, hearts pounding a steady rhythm against ribs. The back door stood ajar, a sliver of fluorescent light spilling out like an invitation laced with caution. Inside, the clinic hummed with the soft beep of monitors and the murmur of a radio tuned to static-laced news, the air cool and sterile, cutting through the desert's furnace. Emily was there, a woman in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled into a practical bun, her scrubs stained faintly from the day's labors. She looked up from charting notes at a cluttered desk, her eyes widening at the intrusion, surprise giving way to guarded recognition as she clocked the vow patches. "You shouldn't be here, not with Kane's patrols circling like wolves." Ethan raised his hands, palms out, his voice a low anchor in the tiled room's echo. "We're not his. Name's Ethan. Lena sent us. We've got Hargrove's ledger, stories starting to stack. But we need yours to tip it. The accidents you've patched, tell us, and we'll keep your girl safe. The whole ridge safe." She hesitated, glancing toward a window where the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that clawed across the linoleum. The ethical bind twisted her features. Her oath to heal clashed with the fear of reprisal, the syndicate's reach extending even to quiet corners like this. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his presence a solid wall, not threatening but reassuring, the faint creak of his leather a subtle underscore. "We know what it's like to carry scars for others," he said, voice rumbling like distant thunder. "Iron vow, we ride for promises, not power. Your words could break this open without a shot fired." Emily's resolve cracked, her fingers trembling as she set down her pen, the air thickening with the weight of decision. She led them to a small office, door clicking shut, and began in hushed tones, the words spilling like a dam breached. It was worse than they'd feared, Kane's enforcers staging mishaps to silence dissent, families pressured until they signed away land, the clinic overwhelmed with the unseen toll, fractures from shoves off porches, contusions masked as clumsiness. "One rancher wouldn't budge," she whispered, eyes distant, the scent of rubbing alcohol sharp in the confined space. They left signs of aggression on his property, tools broken, gates chained shut. His wife's in here weekly now, pretending it's nothing. Javier recorded it all, the device's red light a steady pulse, each revelation a thread pulling Kane's facade apart. But as Emily spoke, a shadow shifted outside the window, a patrol car idling too close, its engine's low purr vibrating through the walls. Tyler's signal came sharp from the alley, two men approaching, radios crackling with urgency. Ethan cut the session short, gratitude in his nod, as Emily slipped them a flash drive. Digital logs of unexplained injuries, timestamps aligning with Kane's moves. "Hide this," she urged, voice fierce, "for my daughter." They melted out the back, the door whispering shut behind them, hearts racing as they remounted in the fading light. The patrol car rounded the corner just as engines roared, the convoy peeling away in a spray of gravel, the clinic shrinking in mirrors like a fragile outpost held against the tide. Dusk bled into the canyons as they raced back toward the cabin, the trail slick with evening dew that beaded on handlebars like unshed tears. The flash drive burned in Ethan's pocket, a key to unlocking the corruption without descending into its chaos. The moral path, justice through exposure rather than fists. But Kane's reach was closing. Radio chatter from Tyler's scout gear hinted at roadblocks being set, the syndicate sensing the noose of truth tightening. At the cabin, Lena met them at the door, Noah peering from behind, the fire's warm glow spilling out to greet the cooling night. "What did you find?" she asked, voice threaded with hope and dread, the aroma of stew simmering inside a comforting veil. Ethan handed over the drive, the crew gathering around the table where lamplight danced on faces etched with determination. Javier synced it to a laptop, files unfolding like petals in the dim. Patient notes, photos of injuries veiled in medical jargon, patterns screaming intent. "This, with Hargrove's ledger, it's ironclad," Javier said, the screen's blue hue carving shadows under his eyes. Marcus grunted approval, but doubt lingered in the air, thick as the pine smoke from the hearth. "Kane'll fight dirty. We go public tomorrow, press in the next county, let the light flood in. But if they hit first..." The dilemma hung. Fortify here, risking a siege that tested their restraint, or ride out to broadcast the evidence, leaving the cabin exposed. Noah stepped forward, his voice steadier now, the night's growth evident in his stance. "They took Dad's honor. Won't let them take yours too. We stand." Lena's hand found Ethan's arm, a silent echo of the promise that bound them, her touch warm through the leather. Olivia's whisper from the diner felt worlds away yet foundational, a stranger's mercy catalyzing this stand. Outside, the canyon winds whispered through the trees, carrying the faint rumble of approaching engines, not Kane's but the Vow's reinforcements trickling in, brothers answering the call across dusty miles. The chosen family swelled, loyalty a fortress against the encroaching dark. As night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant vows, Ethan stood on the porch, the wood cool under his boots, the air alive with the chirp of crickets and the earthy petrichor of recent rains. The evidence was their weapon, truth their ride, but Kane's shadow loomed larger, promising a reckoning that would test every fiber of their code. Redemption wasn't a straight highway. It twisted through moral canyons, demanding sacrifice and unyielding honor. With the crew's murmurs rising behind him, plans solidifying like steel in the forge, Ethan felt the promise fulfilled, not in vengeance, but in the quiet power of standing whole. Dawn would bring the storm, but they were ready, engines of justice revving in the silence. The cabin's porch creaked under Ethan's boots as the first hints of false dawn grayed the eastern sky, the air crisp with the lingering chill of mountain pines and the faint smoky residue of the dying fire inside. Stars still clung to the velvet canopy overhead, reluctant to yield, much like the shadows of doubt that had haunted him since the diner's poisoned cup. The reinforcements had arrived in the night's quiet hours, 8 more Iron Vow brothers, their bikes lined up like silent sentinels in the clearing, engines cooling with soft ticks that echoed the steady rhythm of resolve. Marcus clapped Ethan on the back, his grip firm as forged iron, the scent of leather and road dust clinging to him like a second skin. "Sun's up soon. We ride for the press in Carson Valley. Evidence in hand, no detours." Inside, the table bore the weight of their arsenal. Hargrove's ledger photocopies stacked neatly beside Emily's flash drive, its contents now backed up on Javier's laptop, files glowing with irrefutable patterns of coercion and harm. Lena moved about the kitchenette, brewing coffee that filled the space with its rich, grounding aroma, her hands steadier now, the lines of worry softened by the Brotherhood's unyielding presence. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, polishing a spare helmet with a rag, his young face set in determination that mirrored his father's long-ago gaze. "They can't bury this," he said, voice low but fierce, the firelight from embers dancing in his eyes. Ethan nodded, the promise he'd carried like a phantom limb finally solidifying into action, not through force, but through the unassailable light of truth. The ethical crossroads had loomed all night, broadcast the corruption and risk Kane's desperate lash-out, or fade into the ridges and let the town rot further. But the vow's code, etched in blood and brotherhood, demanded the harder path. Expose without emulating the darkness they fought. Javier synced the files to a secure drive, his medic's precision turning raw data into a narrative of quiet devastation. Diverted waters, starving farms, veiled aggressions leaving families fractured, the clinic's logs a ledger of human cost. "This goes to the state attorney, not the local rag," he murmured, the keyboard's clicks sharp in the hush. "Bypasses the sheriff's blind eye." Tyler scouted the trail ahead via radio, his voice crackling. "Clear so far, Kane's patrols hugging the main roads. We'll ghost through the back canyons." As the sky blushed pink, the convoy formed, a steel serpent of 12 Harleys. Low rumbles building to a harmonious thunder that vibrated through the earth, scattering dew from pine needles in glistening arcs. Ethan took point. Lena and Noah tucked safely in a reinforced van, trailed by Marcus and 2 others. The group's cohesion, a living testament to chosen family. The trail descended in switchbacks slick with morning mist. Tires gripping gravel that crunched like brittle resolve, the air alive with the fresh bite of wet bark and wild mint crushed underfoot. Shadow Ridge lay behind, its spires silhouetted against the rising sun, but Ethan's thoughts drifted to Olivia, miles away at her diner, her whisper the spark that had ignited this chain. Had she sensed the ripple, a stranger's mercy, weaving into the fabric of redemption he now chased? The ride stretched through arroyos where canyon walls rose like ancient guardians, sunlight piercing the gaps in golden shafts that warmed the riders' backs. No pursuit dogged them. Kane's web, for all its sprawl, couldn't cover every shadow. By mid-morning, Carson Valley unfolded, a bustling county seat with clean streets and impartial eyes. The state attorney's office, a modest brick building under a flag, snapping in the breeze. They pulled into the lot, engines cutting off one by one until silence settled, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft sigh of relief. Ethan dismounted, the flash drive heavy in his palm, and led the way inside, the crew fanning out like quiet protectors, jackets still bearing the road's dust. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara Voss, met them in a conference room smelling of polished wood and fresh ink, her desk piled with files that spoke of battles won through words, not weapons. Ethan laid it out methodically, the diner's poison as the entry wound, Lena's cafe as the heart of the fight, the gathered proofs as the blade to sever Kane's hold. Voss scanned the drive's contents, her expression hardening with each revelation. The ledger's payoffs, Emily's injury logs time-stamped to incidents, Hargrove's testimony transcribed in Javier's neat script. "This is solid," she said, voice edged with the steel of justice long delayed. "Water rights fraud, coercion bordering on institutional abuse. We'll move fast. Raids today, hearings tomorrow. Kane's empire crumbles under scrutiny like this." Outside, as the sun climbed to noon, word spread through the Vow's network. Reporters alerted discreetly, the press converging like hawks on a fresh kill. Kane's downfall unfolded in real time. Sirens wailing toward Shadow Ridge, his enforcers scattering like rats from light, the sheriff's office suddenly cooperative under federal glare. Ethan watched from the office window, the valley's green expanse a contrast to the arid scars they'd left behind, the ethical victory tasting sweeter than any vengeance. No blood spilled by their hands. The truth had ridden ahead, honoring the vow in its purest form. By evening, back on the road toward the cabin, now a temporary haven, they received the calls. Kane in cuffs, his web unraveling in confessions pried by impartial probes. Lena's cafe secured, the aquifer preserved, families like Hargrove's and Emily's breathing freer under the weight lifted. The convoy paused at a ridge overlook, engines idling as the sun dipped, painting the canyons in fiery hues that mirrored the fire rekindled in Ethan's chest. Noah dismounted from the van, hugging Ethan fiercely. The boys whisper, "Thanks for coming back," sealing the promise fulfilled. Lena's eyes met his over the boy's shoulder, gratitude unspoken but profound, the chosen family encircling them in a ring of leather and loyalty. As stars emerged, the group rode into twilight, the road stretching infinite but no longer lonely. Olivia's diner sign flickered in Ethan's mind, a beacon of unexpected grace. He'd circle back, thank her properly, let her know her whisper had saved more than one life. Redemption wasn't a destination, but a ride, through moral twists and loyal turns, honoring scars as badges of honor. The iron vow thundered on, engines singing of promises kept, justice poetic and profound, the desert wind carrying their legacy into the night. Thank you for riding this journey with us to the end. If these tales of grit, grace, and unbreakable bonds moved you, subscribe now and join the Brotherhood. More stories of honor on the open road await.